Welcome to the Get Unhooked podcast with Jason Coombs, where experience meets insight. Jason Coombs, nationally recognized speaker, best-selling author, and founder of Brickhouse Recovery, shares hard-earned lessons on resilience, leadership, addiction, and mental health. No filters, no fluff, just real stories, practical wisdom, and a deeper look at what it takes to grow, lead, and keep moving forward. Now here's your host, Jason Coombs.
I have a topic that I think it's going to be very helpful when we get into some of the conversations with our addicted loved ones in and around boundaries and holding agreements. I want to back up and set the premise, and then I'm going to introduce you to a little framework that is underneath the secret number one, which is why it's important to reconsider everything we think we know about addiction and what we're walking through. Okay. Now you might be thinking, yeah. I've already heard about the disease model. I get it. This is a disease. It's legitimate. Part of that is also recognizing that when we change the way we look at things, the things we look at change. So as you think about how to set boundaries and how to hold boundaries, this is the battle, the constant struggle that each of you and I have, is like making sure that we're operating off of principles when we get into the tactical day-to-day conversations with our loved ones. And so as a review, I think it's important to float this back up and remind everybody of what we're dealing with. And Dr. Kevin McCauley was one of my mentors, and he wrote the foreword to Unhooked, and he did the groundbreaking work in Pleasure Unwoven, mapping out with the Institute for Addiction Study the actual brain science of what is going on in the brain. Now, why is this important? It's important to recognize that when an individual is resistant to change, there is a willingness issue, a readiness issue, as well as a neurological issue. And that neurological issue is important to factor in when we're talking to our loved ones, and why the allowing the loved ones to experience the natural consequences of their actions is so vital. Because in the disease side of things, the brain is operating in addiction. It's operating from the midbrain, or the sub area of survival. Okay. The prefrontal cortex is where understanding your agreements that you made with them, maybe you set out a contract with them. I do that a lot with staff and with clients. It's like, okay, these are the guardrails. These are the agreements. If you enter into this agreement under these terms, then I will deliver these terms and my side of the agreement. And so at least we know where the goalposts are, and they're not moving, right? So with that said, the understanding of what's happening in that space is when those agreements are broken, a lot of that is a willingness issue, but a lot of that is also continuing to operate from a midbrain standpoint, which is that fight or flight mentality, or freeze, fight, flight, or freeze. And a lot of times that's where they get stuck in moving through the stages of change. So knowing that, it's really helpful to go back to what works. And this is my mentor who taught me, when I say this is my mentor, is Bill Vogel. He taught me in a particular situation. I was struggling with a client and their resistance to change, but they were telling me every week all the things that they were going to do over the weekend to protect their sobriety. I really, really wanted them to succeed. And so I would do all the things. I would check in on them. I made agreements with them. I would help them out and make contingency plans. So if they succeeded and they stayed sober, then, I'd give them a gift card or something, try to incent them. And these were all behaviors that were motivated in a good place and stemmed from a great place of love. And however, when they didn't meet those expectations, I felt manipulated and I felt like I was being played. And that left me feeling resentful and afraid of the confrontation, afraid of what they might say. Would they leave a bad Google review? Would they tell their friends that, Brick House is, a horrible place to go? All those fears came running through my mind. So sometimes I wouldn't even approach them. And I'd just sit there and like let things slide and not hold the boundaries to the agreements that we made. Other times I would go in, I'd lay it down, but I'd lay down the consequences, but it was more out of resentment. Underneath that was my fear because of the way I felt they were manipulating me. So I struggled with the emotional raincoat piece. Bill came alongside me, put his arm around me. He said, Jason, look, what stage of change do you think this client is in? And I was like, definitely not ready. He's definitely not ready. He needs to go out and do some more research and hit rock bottom before he's ready. And he said, but what if there were more options to look at this, different angles to look at this, instead of they're either ready or they're not ready? And that's when he wrote down and drew out a diagram that really helped me better understand what an individual is going through in the stages of change. And this is where I think the light bulb moment came on. It was first like looking at this stage of change. It's like, okay, knowing the stages of change, which I was familiar with, pre-contemplation is they're not ready. You're the problem, not the drugs. Contemplation is, okay, maybe these are creating a problem, but they're also still giving me a lot of benefits. And so it's this complete, like, yes, pros and cons to both, but not a lot of change happening. And a lot of people stay in this contemplation stage for a long, long time, especially when the midbrain is in the freeze stage, like the fight, flight, or freeze. And then usually what ends up happening is natural consequences evoke internal motivation that kind of overrides the midbrain and overrides that survival space because there's a new need to survive. So it's more clear and present danger to them if they all of a sudden don't have a home or they all of a sudden don't have their freedom. And it's like, okay, like whatever was a priority is now like lowering because the natural consequences that they're currently facing is like bam, smack in their face. And that is just in context of sobriety. But I'm going to get to the second aha moment I had here in a second. Once most of the individuals that I treat are in the pre-contemplation or the contemplation stage. A few of them make it to the preparation stage before they come into treatment. And that means they're ready to change. They're ready to overcome this. And they never want to look back and they just need the tools to do it. But what's interesting is that you notice the ambivalence is around every single stage. So one day they might be in pre-contemplation, the next day they might be in preparation, the next day they might be in contemplation, the next day they might be in pre-contemplation. So they vacillate through because all the while they're trying to resolve this ambivalence between risk, reward, between staying the same and change. What are they going to lose? What are they going to gain? And it can be debilitating and it can be very difficult to navigate through that, especially if you don't have someone to talk it out with that is safe, someone that's not going to impose their ideas on you, someone that's not going to try to force an agenda, someone that's not going to talk in terms of absolutes, but rather in a space of, hey, it sounds to me like this is a difficult decision for you because, you get a lot of benefit to, let's talk specifically to using. You get a lot of benefit to using. seems to help you in your mind, and it helps you feel better, probably escape some things. And then on the other hand, you're experiencing these negative consequences. That must be really hard. Rather than, don't you see the problem? You should fix this. Like, it's clear. You should fix this. Like, you should stop using, and then everything else is going to get better for you. A lot of times that's easy to say, but it's tricky to get them to see it. So that's why I highlight the stages of change, because when Bill taught me these stages of change, and then he asked me, okay, where is this client in the stages of change? I was like, I think they're in contemplation, because they keep making promises. I can tell they're sincere, but they just aren't following through. And he's like, I would agree with you that he's in contemplation. He's like, now let's take it one step further, okay? And I want you to just consider all the domains of their life in early sobriety, and now look at the stages of change. It's not the stage that they're in. Contemplation does not mean they're in contemplation in every single area of their life or area of their early sobriety. And this was that second aha moment where it's like, oh my gosh, like, they've been promising me that they'll go to meetings. They really want that. Like, they're working their steps. They're, living in sober living. They're active in the treatment program. But when it came time to hang out with people in recovery and not hang out with their drinking buddies and their using friends, like, that's where the pitfall was. They were in pre-contemplation about their social surroundings and who they were spending time with. And that's why they kept slipping. It wasn't because they were trying to manipulate me, or I'm sure there was some of that too, but I hope you get where I'm coming from. Is there's a lot more going on with an individual. And I'd like to liken it to what cross addiction might look like for some of us and for individuals who are sober in early recovery. So think of like compulsive overeating, for example. How many of us are in the pre-contemplation stage of our relationship with food? Do we need to work on our relationship with food? Is it a healthy relationship with food? Maybe we're in the contemplation stage. I vacillate between pre-contemplation and preparation all the time. And then I would try to get into action. But my relationship with food has been a challenge for most of my life. And it remains a challenge today. Let's take pornography, for example. That's going to be a different stage of change than overeating. Like in the pornography stages of change, I'm in recovery or maintenance. So I'm in stage 5. Okay. But in compulsive overeating, I guess you could say that I'm in relapse because of some of the choices I've made recently in eating sugars, in the holidays and things like that. And you can go around and look at like controlling others. How many of us are facing that right now? How many of us are in the pre-contemplation stage about how we control others? And that could be through silent scorn. It doesn't always have to be through outspoken word. How many of us withhold love? And that's one way that we're able to control others. Toxic validation. Looking at stages of change and working on our toxic validation. What I mean by that is, where do we seek validation? I used to seek validation from drugs and alcohol and from companionship. And a lot of times that companionship, we attract the way we are. And so I was wounded, needy, broken. I needed others to validate me. And so I would surround myself with people who also needed validation. And that was enmeshment and toxic validation. And when I got sober, I didn't realize that I had an addiction problem to needing validation from others, especially from women. And so going into therapy on that, I moved through the stages of change, recognizing that a lot of my problems that led me to where I was had to do with putting myself in toxic relationships and having a child out of wedlock and going through an adoption process and risky behaviors in that area. I recognized that that was an area that I did need to make some changes in. And so I moved into the preparation and then into action and then into maintenance. But if you were to ask me in my first four rounds of treatment, if I had toxic validation, I would have been in pre-contemplation the whole time. I'd be like, no. I mean, I like girls, but what does that matter? Like, that's normal. And so, if you think about overworking and what stage of change are you in and you're overworking, social media, electronics, what stage of change are you in? You feel like you need to make some changes in that area, or are you good? Are you in the maintenance stage of where you want to be? Shopping or spending, Amazon, that's a tricky one. That's a tricky one for a lot of people, knowing that maybe you should spend less and not order so much off Amazon or shopping, but shoes pop up on your feed and you're like, I want those shoes. And if I just hit this button, they're going to be at my doorstep in the next few days and it'll be like Christmas. And you get hooked to that feeling of Christmas and birthdays every other day. And that's a real thing for me. And so, especially with shoes, I like shoes. And so, looking at, okay, right now I'm in the preparation stage, moving into action stage, and working on, okay, I'm not going to have impulsive purchases, and I'm going to be thoughtful about that. I'm going to withhold from spending. I got a friend who's in the gambling arena, and he's been keeping it secret for a long time, and just came out that he has been struggling for years in silence. And, this person's been in recovery from alcohol and drugs for over a decade, but no one knew that he was in pre-contemplation and contemplation, struggling with gambling this whole time. And, these are very important concepts to be considering, especially when you're trying to influence someone, move through the stages of change. You can relate by looking at your own life and considering where you're at in working on yourself. And are you the person that you want to be? Are you the mother that you want to be to your children, not just your addicted loved one, but to all of your children? And what are some of the areas that might be neglected in your life domains and in your relationships that could use a little attention that the addiction has been dominating or taking from you in terms of emotional availability and time spent? So be thinking about the difficulty you have in the goals that you've set around some of these areas and the barrier that you run into when it comes to trying to overcome them. And that will help you and give you empathy for what someone with an addiction is going through, because there's a lot that goes into, what if I do give this up? Like, what if I quit? Then what does it look like? Who am I without this? What do the holidays look like without drugs and alcohol? Or for me, what do the holidays look like without overeating? That's interesting to think about. Like, what does Thanksgiving look like? Well, my plan this year, and what I'm teaching my clients, is this year for Thanksgiving, be the one that shows up early, helps get the dinner ready and get the table set, all the things, and be the last one who leaves the kitchen. So stay and clean up, and during the meal, instead of overeating, go and fill everybody's water glass. Like, look and see if you can be of service somehow, some way to others, and you'll find you'll have protection. You'll have protection over the cravings to either escape and feel shame, which might lead to drinking later, or for me, it leads to compulsive overeating if I'm not of service to others. If I'm just thinking about me and my social anxiety, the fastest thing that I know how to get out of my social anxiety is to eat, and to eat something that's going to give me some dopamine. And so, be thinking about that when you go into the holidays. And this, maybe this message gets to you after the holidays, but it's still true because there's a holiday coming. There's always a holiday coming. And so be thinking about, how can I be proactive rather than reactive to some of my compulsive behaviors, whatever that is. And we can all relate to one of these areas in some way. Maybe it's electronics and gaming. Maybe it's vaping. Maybe it's over-exercising, over-dieting. There are so many things that come into it when it comes to overcoming cross-addiction. So as you all are thinking about your addicted loved ones, be mindful of the stage of change they're in, the process that they go through to change, so that you're able to not just have empathy and compassion, but recognize that if you have an agreement with your addicted loved one and they decide that they want to break that agreement, rescuing them means that you respond to one of the faces of their addiction or their defense mechanisms, whether it's hostility, whether it's gaslighting, whether it's crying and self-pity and manipulating that way so that you soften your heart and you give and you say, okay, let's try this again. You can, and you just give in. And one way or another, you give in. And the issue with that is they just won. The midbrain just won so that the prefrontal cortex doesn't have to experience any discomfort. And the internal motivation is lacking, because if they can win a manipulation of their character defects so that they can resume the life that they're having, then they are being denied the very ingredient that sparks volition and the desire to change, which is natural consequences. And so if you have to practice being a broken record and give them vitamin N by saying, no, I love you, but you opted out of our agreement. We made an agreement. You opted out, not me. I know that it's hard for me to say, like, you have to move out, or this agreement is no longer valid because you broke the agreement. This is on you. I didn't break my agreement. You broke the agreement. And I'm not blaming you. I'm just saying these are the natural consequences we agreed upon. And now it's going to play out that way. And then you armor up with the emotional raincoat, which doesn't mean you stop loving them, but it means loving yourself enough to be a person of integrity and hold your word. Hold to your word. And when they are allowed to feel the natural consequences of their actions, that process is where I see God work. That's the process where I see ambivalence be resolved. That's where I see internal motivation be evoked. That's where I see other angels, physical or spiritual, show up in our loved ones' lives and help get them to the next place, in the next level. And it's just amazing. And so as you work on your recovery, as you work on your stages of change in the areas that you want to open up more sunlight to the spirit and access to that sunlight through overcoming your obstacles and your behaviors that you're feeling shame about, that you're feeling are holding you back, that you're feeling you would like to tackle and overcome. As you work on those things, I can promise you there are people that will step in the lives of your loved ones, and your prayers will be answered, and they'll get nudged and they'll get help. Now, whether they respond to that help and whether they make those changes now or in the future, remember, this is between them and their maker. This is between them and their maker. And I promise you that there is the eye of the shepherd, the great shepherd, is upon them and is doing everything in his power to lead them back to the light and to health and restore them. And I believe that this is the long game approach, and it's important to remember that sometimes this takes a lifetime, sometimes this takes a decade, sometimes this takes months, sometimes the miracle is around the corner. So because you don't know, don't give up. Hope fiercely. Get into those steps to surrender. If you have opted into the Live Unhooked experience and the courses, dive into those steps to surrender, because the surrender blueprint will help free you from those emotions that will naturally come up and impact how you hold boundaries or how you let those boundaries be more like ribbons that are easily broken and walked through. So I love this work. I love empowering family members because you are the most important people in your addicted loved ones' lives, because you have the most influence, whether you believe it or not. And I'm speaking to mostly mothers, fathers that might be listening in, daughters, sons, siblings, wherever you fall in the relationship, because you are so close to it, you have the most influence on them. And that means not withholding love, but withholding comfort, withholding enabling behaviors, withholding rescuing is some of the hardest work you'll ever do. But I promise you that if you can look into your stages of change in the rescuing domain and identify, where are you at? Are you in pre-contemplation about rescuing? Like, do you think it's a problem, or do you think it's fine to do? Or are you scared to change it? If you're in the contemplation stage, maybe you're still rescuing and you're enabling, but you're back and forth, that chronic contemplation. It's just okay where you're at. I'm not saying you need to be anywhere further. The gift is in the awareness. I think the gift is in understanding the framework and understanding the awareness, because you'll vacillate through them. And then check your perfectionism. Check your perfectionism. Do you expect that you need to be in action in every single domain all the time? And if you ever slip back and have a setback, have a relapse in your own area that you're working on, is that failure or is that feedback? I look at it as feedback. And I believe that there will be a day in the next life where I'll be free from all of these chains and all of these struggles, and I'll have rest. But in the meantime, this is my work and this is your work, and we work on it consistently, and we are refined through the process. That's the benefit of doing this work. We are refined through the process, even in the mess, even in the setbacks, even in the relapses. It's all part of refining us and perfecting us to become more loving and empathetic and available emotionally to our loved ones and to ourselves, most of all. Many of you are great at being available to others, but are you available to yourself? Are you available to sink in and soak up some good quality time with yourself and with God, and just being with your journal and having conversations with him, you know? So my challenge to you is set aside 30 minutes in the next 24 hours for a vow of silence. A vow of silence without your phones, without anything to distract you, and take that time where you are just in that vow, journaling, reading, connecting to the divine you and the spirit and sunlight of that spirit, so that you can receive guidance for your life and step away from the obsession about your addicted loved one and look at your dreams, your goals, your life. What do you want to become? And how can you get there? What is your larger story? Because addiction's the smaller story. What is your larger story that needs to be attended to? What is God inviting you into? What is next? And how can you prepare yourself to step into that? And from that place, you'll be grounded and surrounded by solid individuals where you'll be able to help others, because they rise highest who lift as they go. And so the key to the larger story is lifting others as you rise, and as you take your mess and you make it your message, and as you become a bigger influencer in your loved ones' lives and your community's lives, just being that beacon of light that you are, and being broken and being completely undone, beautifully undone, is perfect, because that's where Stacy helped me with this, and my assistant, she helped me to realize, Jason, just be authentic. Like, just be you, and don't worry so much about all of the things that I was worried about as I was talking to her. And that's helped me a great deal. Just be like, yeah, just gonna be broken and me. And that's okay, because I struggle with this stuff too, you guys. Anyway, I appreciate you joining me today. And I hope that this was beneficial. And I hope it spoke to one of you at the very least. And I hope it helps you change your perspective and change your life and change the way you look at yourself and the way you look at others. Because when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. I just want to thank you for taking the time to listen to this show. Thank you for your support. Thank you for sharing these episodes so that they can help others. This is one way that you can give back and pay it forward, is by just passing along this free information to others that are possibly in need. Share it on social media, share it with your loved ones and family members. And don't forget, you can access my book on Audible, as well as on Amazon or on my website, as well as you can find information about our services at Brickhouse Recovery at brickhouserecovery.com.